Imagine paying like $1.6 million for a luxury mountain cottage.
Right, absolute dream home material.
Exactly. But then you step onto your back deck with your morning cup of coffee, and you realize you are technically trespassing in a 300-pound bear's dining room.
Yeah, that is a terrifying wake-up call.
And to top it off, your local tax bill just doubled to pay for, a single aging water pipe. Welcome to the reality of mountain living.
It completely shatters that whole postcard illusion, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
We project this idea of absolute unchanging tranquility onto these isolated towns. But the reality is, it's this incredibly high stakes, really expensive balancing act.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening to this, you probably appreciate a good look behind the curtain of how things actually work.
Absolutely.
Today, we are analyzing a literal snapshot in time. We've got a single issue of the Highlands newspaper from June 6, 2019. This serves the small mountain town of Highlands, North Carolina.
Yeah, and our mission here isn't just to, read you the local news.
Right, no one wants just a news recap. We're going to dissect this paper to uncover the hidden mechanics of a micro-ecosystem. We're looking at a community that is actively juggling apex predators, international fugitives, historical grudges, and the staggering invisible costs of basic survival.
Exactly. Because a single local paper from a single week reveals the universal mechanisms of how human settlements function when they are pushed to their absolute geographical limits.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you think moving to an isolated mountain town means leaving the chaos of the world behind, the front page of this newspaper serves up a pretty serious reality check.
It really does.
The best way I can describe it is living in a place like Highlands is a lot like living on the International Space Station.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Right. The environment surrounding you actively wants to kill you. And creating this artificial bubble of safety and paved roads and that hostile geography, it requires a massive invisible apparatus.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. You are constantly fighting the environment just to maintain a baseline of civilization. And because it's a fortress of sorts, it attracts a very specific set of variables.
Right, and sometimes that fortress gets breached. We see this immediately in the paper. There was a bank robbery that started in Greenville, North Carolina.
Which is way over in the eastern part of the state.
Exactly, completely different area. But the chase came to an abrupt halt right in Highlands on May 23rd. The Macon County Sheriff's Office Special Response Team and U.S. Marshals literally had to extract the suspect who was trying to use the town as a hideout.
What's fascinating here is the dual nature of geographic isolation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. The exact same remote, hard-to-reach topography that makes a place like Highlands a highly desirable exclusive retreat for high-net-worth residents is exactly what makes it a tactical hideout for a fugitive on the run.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The topography doesn't care about your tax bracket. It just provides cover.
Yeah.
It creates this blind spot where people assume the rules of the outside world no longer apply.
But the outside world isn't the only threat, right?
Yeah.
Because the environment they're sitting in is constantly pushing back.
Definitely.
In the exact same issue, there's a detailed report on 3 recent bear attacks on dogs.
3 of them.
Yeah, 3. A mama bear with 2 cubs killed a chihuahua on Crow Drive. Another dog was taken on Little Bear Pen. And 2 standard poodles sustained severe lacerations off Hicks Road.
That is brutal.
It is. Cynthia Strain from the local bear task force issues this really stark warning. She notes that while bears aren't inherently aggressive, they are fiercely protective. If a dog gets between a mother and her cubs, primal instincts just take over immediately.
And notice how the architecture of wealth directly conflicts with the realities of apex predators here.
How so?
Well, you pave roads, you build beautiful decks, you curate the landscaping, and you create this illusion of mastery over nature. But fundamentally, you have just dropped a human living room into a bear's natural habitat.
But wait, if you have all this wealth and all these resources, why not just build walls? Like, why not physically fence off the community to keep the wildlife out and the poodles safe?
Because if you wall off the mountain, you destroy the exact aesthetic reason people move there.
Oh, right. The views.
Exactly. They want unobstructed views of the wild. They want the illusion of being one with nature, but they want it entirely on their terms.
Which doesn't really work with wild animals.
Right. The friction happens because the residents are lulled into a false sense of security by their manicured lawns, and they forget that geography dictates the rules. Nature hasn't been conquered in these towns. It's merely being tolerated.
Tolerated, not conquered. That is a really profound distinction. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the town isn't just trying to draw boundaries against wild animals. It has spent the last century trying to draw boundaries against its own citizens'
Oh,
behaviors.
yeah, the transition is wild.
It is absolute whiplash, going from the rugged frontier to modern micromanagement in this single newspaper.
You're referring to the juxtaposition of the town's historical lawlessness versus its modern civic ordinances.
Exactly. So on one page, there's an announcement that the Highlands Historical Society is dedicating a Legends and Lore marker on Juneteenth, and it's to commemorate the 1885 Moccasin War.
The Moccasin War.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the paper explains that a revenuer, which is a federal agent enforcing liquor tax laws, arrested 2 local moonshiners and held them at the Highlands Inn.
Okay.
And in retaliation, an armed militia of 18 moonshine volunteers marched across the border from Georgia and declared literal war right on Main Street.
I mean, it's the rawest form of frontier autonomy. Back then, the primary threat to the settlement wasn't, traffic or infrastructure. It was a neighboring militia with guns. The survival of the town depended on navigating that physical violence.
But then you turn the page to 2019, and town engineer Lamar Nix, along with the Public Safety Committee, are recommending lowering speed limits to 15 or 20 miles per hour on unmarked roads.
Quite the shift from armed militias.
Right. Nix argues that if a road lacks a center line, it should be heavily restricted, and pedestrian areas must be 15 miles per hour. They're actively targeting the, quote, Larry Leadfoots.
Larry Leadfoots, yeah.
I have to push back here, though. Isn't this just egregious local government overreach? We went from armed shootouts on Main Street to slapping residents with fines for doing 22 in a 15 zone.
I get why it looks like that. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at how towns actually evolve.
Okay, tell me.
It's not overreach. It's the standard life cycle of a successful settlement. When a town survives its frontier era and attracts wealth, its definition of danger inherently shifts.
Oh, I see.
Today, the chaos isn't a moonshiner with a rifle. It's a tourist driving a heavy SUV too fast down a narrow mountain pass.
So the Larry Leadfoots are the modern-day moonshiners.
Functionally, yes. And let's look at the mechanics of why Lamar Nix wants that specific 15-mile-per-hour limit on unmarked roads.
Is there a science to it?
Yeah, absolutely. When a road lacks a painted center line, a driver's brain loses its primary spatial reference point. In a flat, gridded suburb, drifting slightly just means you bump a curb. On a mountain, drifting means you either go off a sheer drop or you hit a pedestrian in a blind curve.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot less forgiving.
Exactly. 15 mile per hour is the exact threshold where a human can cognitively react to an unpredictable variable without a spatial guide. Micromanaging speed is essentially the modern equivalent of keeping the peace.
I suppose you don't get the luxury of worrying about a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit unless you've already solved the problem of armed militias in the town square.
Very true.
But maintaining that level of safety, enforcing those rules, and keeping the space station running the cost is astronomical.
It really is. The financial engine required to sustain a highly regulated, safe environment in an isolated geography is incredibly fragile.
The numbers in this paper are genuinely staggering. Let's look at the Highlands Fire and Rescue along with the Sky Valley Staley Mountain Department.
Okay.
They're coming before the commissioners requesting their first non-revenue neutral fire tax increases since 1999.
That's a huge deal.
It is. And just to clarify for anyone listening who might be unfamiliar with municipal jargon, non-revenue neutral means they aren't just shuffling existing budgets around. They actually need to reach deeper into residents' pockets to fundamentally increase the total tax collected.
Which tells us that the actual cost of providing modern emergency services has finally outpaced the baseline revenue they've relied on for 2 decades.
But the real financial shocker is the water and sewer infrastructure.
Oh, the utility rates.
Yeah. Mayor Patrick Taylor wrote a whole column defending the town's utility rates against a critical letter to the editor. The math he lays out is wild.
Let's hear it.
Okay, the town just spent $375,000 to replace a single failing 50-year-old water line.
$375,000.
Right. And that 6-inch line serves exactly 13 homes located outside the town limits. These homes pay about $70 a month for water.
Wow.
And on top of that, the town is spending $600,000 on the Satchela water tank and $875,000 to replace an aging line on split rail.
It perfectly illustrates that invisible, massive engineering apparatus you mentioned earlier.
But wait, objectively speaking, isn't that just terrible municipal management? Like, $375,000 for 13 houses. You would have to collect those $70 monthly fees for centuries just to break even.
You really would.
So why wouldn't the town just refuse the upgrade and tell those 13 homeowners to go dig their own wells?
Because digging a well on a solid granite mountain is basically a geological gamble.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It often yields water that is full of heavy metals, or the well simply runs dry. If those 13 homes lose reliable water, their property values plummet.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. If property values plummet, the entire tax base of the town shrinks, which means there is less money for the fire department, the roads, and the schools. The town has to absorb the upfront cost of the pipe to protect the macroeconomy of the community.
Okay, that makes sense from a tax-based perspective, but the physical cost of moving that water is still mind-blowing. If you're listening to this in a flat suburban neighborhood right now, you probably don't think twice about turning on your kitchen faucet. But in Highlands, water doesn't just flow.
Exactly. You are paying to defy gravity.
Because water is heavy.
Water is incredibly heavy.
Right.
To move it up steep elevation grades requires massive high-capacity pump stations. The pipes have to be heavily reinforced to handle the intense pressure spikes required to push water hundreds of vertical feet.
And they're up in the mountains, so the weather has to be a factor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's a mountain, you have dramatic freeze-thaw cycles all winter that constantly expand and contract the ground, which ends up shattering those expensive pipes.
So what does this all mean for the town's financial future? Like, how do they not just drown in municipal debt?
That is exactly why Mayor Taylor is aggressively defending a strict pay-as-you-go philosophy.
Paying for things up front.
Yes. He understands that if a tiny municipality undercharges its residents just to keep them happy in the short term, they will eventually have to take out massive municipal bonds to fix shattered pipes.
And the interest on that debt would be crushing.
The debt interest alone would bankrupt a small, permanent tax base. They have to charge a premium just to maintain the status quo.
So if you're a resident, you're paying high taxes to pump water up a cliff, you're getting fined for doing 20-mile dare, and you have to worry about bears eating your poodle.
It sounds rough when you list it all out.
Right. So what actually keeps people there? Why not just vacation there and live somewhere easier?
It really comes down to the sociological mechanisms of survival. In challenging environments, people lean heavily into structured community networks.
The paper is actually bursting with this. It's not just a collection of individuals living near each other. There is intense civic engagement.
What kind of groups are they highlighting?
Well, the Mountaintop Rotary Club didn't just meet. They won the district award for membership growth, increasing their ranks by 25% in a single year.
That's huge.
And another group, the Advanced Highlands Education Committee, or AHEC, raised over $100,000 in its very first year just to buy technology for the local Highlands school.
Which, by the way, is an incredible statistical anomaly.
Why is that an anomaly?
Nationally, traditional civic organizations like Rotary clubs are aging out and dying. To see 25% growth in a single year in a tiny mountain town tells you something very specific about the sociology of isolation.
People need each other.
Exactly.
And it isn't just fundraising either. There is a deep intellectual engagement happening too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Local columnist Kathy Manos Penn dedicates her space to discussing her to-be Red List, and it's heavily focused on King Arthur lore.
King Arthur.
Yeah, she's reviewing books like Finding Cemlane, Charlie Lovett's The Lost Book of the Grail, and The Forever King. It's this beautifully cozy intellectual pursuit. But here is the cognitive dissonance right next to these quaint updates about King Arthur and school bake sales. There are full-page advertisements for ultra-luxury real estate.
Ah, the contrast.
Yeah, I'm looking at an ad for cottages on 4th. It's a half-acre lot and home selling for $1.695 million, which casually includes an $80,000 country club membership.
This raises an important question about how communities avoid becoming sterile.
What do you mean by sterile?
Well, when a remote location is discovered by extreme wealth, it usually hollows out the local culture. It just becomes a collection of empty, dark vacation mansions.
Right, so why isn't Highlands just a sterile resort for the ultra-rich? Why do these civic groups thrive here when they are dying everywhere else?
Because the geographical isolation forces socialization.
You can't just hide away.
No, you can't. In a major city, you can buy your way into infinite entertainment without ever knowing your neighbor's name. In a mountain town of a few thousand people, if you don't actively participate in structured local groups, you are entirely alone in a dark forest.
Wow, that is a stark image.
But it's true. The Rotary clubs, the education committees, the local colonists, they are the social infrastructure. The millions of dollars in wealth might pay for the water pipes, but the civic engagement provides the actual pulse. It forces residents, regardless of their net worth, to invest emotionally in the shared space.
So the environment forces you to rely on your neighbors, which organically preserves the soul of the town.
Exactly.
We started this deep dive looking at what seems like a simple, quiet mountain town. But through one newspaper from June 2019, we've unpacked the fierce physics, economics, and psychology required to keep it running.
It's a lot of moving parts.
It really is. We saw the friction between curated wealth and apex predators. We saw how a town evolves from surviving armed moonshiners to optimizing the spatial psychology of 15-mile-per-hour speed limits. And we explored the gravity-defying economics of municipal plumbing.
It is a remarkable testament to human stubbornness and cooperation. We insist on building civilization where it arguably shouldn't exist, and then we work furiously to maintain it.
It makes you look at every small town differently.
It really does. And, as we wrap up, I want to pivot to a thought that builds on everything we've just discussed.
Sure. What's on your mind?
We've talked about how this town balances its fragile micro-ecosystem with the people who live there now. But what happens to these isolated, highly engineered mountain towns in the era of remote work?
Oh, like the rise of the Zoom town.
Exactly. As high-speed internet allows a flood of remote workers to move to places like Highlands people who want the beautiful view but maybe don't understand the fragile infrastructure or have no desire to join the local Rotary Club, does that social glue finally dissolve?
That is a great question.
If a town fills up with people who just view it as a scenic backdrop for their Zoom calls, rather than a delicate ecosystem requiring civic participation, does the whole space station eventually collapse?
Wow.
When we dream of escaping to the mountains, do we actively ignore the intense, continuous effort required to keep the wilderness both human and natural at bay? It's the existential threat of the next decade. If the community pulse stops, the wealth alone won't keep the wilderness out for long.
That is something to think about the next time you browse real estate listings in a quaint mountain town. I challenge you, the listener, to pick up your own local newspaper this week. Look past the surface headlines. Look for the hidden tensions, the zoning debates, the infrastructure costs, the local civic groups pushing back against isolation. Try to spot the invisible engineering holding your own neighborhood together. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.